Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's me again, aka Rex, back together here with John. Hello, John.
Hello.
John, it's been so long since we have actually gotten around to finally get the time to record our fourth episode review for this program. So, it's been a long time. I'm just amazed that we actually managed to find time to do it finally again. Because life is
Yeah,
busy. That's what
for
happens.
sure. Yep.
That's what happens when you are really busy with work and adult life, I guess. But anyway, let's get into our episode. So, this is going to be our fourth episode, which is the episode about what the show tells us is 90 million years ago of New Mexico in North America. Now, let me just swap our image into the setting, and obviously it's important to say that 90 million years ago is what the show is telling us. Now, this will come in handy later when we get into the animals, but for now I wanted you to take this one, and uh, I presume we're just gonna start with the usual order, the setting. So would you like to talk about the Moreno Hill formation?
Sure. So, real quick, before they get straight into the dinosaurs and all that, the segment begins with a shot of Albuquerque, New Mexico, where they say without the Rio Grande River, New Mexico's largest city would be, it would basically be parched. But 90 million years ago or so, it was a tropical swamp. And based on what I've read up on the Moreno Hill Formation and its geology, it's a coal-bearing formation, which, if I may delve a little bit into conventional geology, if you find a formation where there's a lot of coal, what that typically means is that it's a poorly poorly sorted, poorly filtered. Basically, what that means is that there would have been a lot of water held up in the area back when this was all deposited. So, for example, you look at the Carboniferous coal forests, and the amount of coal you get from Carboniferous dated formations. That's an area where you would have like swamps because of the amount of water that's remaining there without being filtered out or drying up or whatever. It's not like red beds where that's more seasonal because of the amount of oxygen. Okay, poorly oxygenated. That's what I think was looking for. Um, and so where I'm going with this is that uh, for this formation itself is very coal. It has a lot of coal in it, which so it was probably a swamp, or at least had swamp-like features to it. And I've also read up that it was fluvial, which makes sense given that which would make that there would be a lot of flowing streams or rivers and all that. And based on this location that they put that they filmed this segment in, it matches pretty well with what you would expect for what you're seeing in the rock record. There's a lot of waterways. It's very tropical. I say that, although honestly, I feel like the location itself reminds me too much of the Midwest, but that's neither here nor there. And overall, it kind of matches really well with what the rock record says. So I kudos to the not developers, the filmmakers for choosing a really solid location for the Moreno Hill Formation. I also have a picture of the world during the mid Cretaceous because they emphasize the Western Interior Seaway that split up North America back then, and about the southeastern area of the continent, or back then Laramidia, is where it takes place in. So that lines up pretty well. And then I also have a picture of the state of New Mexico with a crimson star indicating where the Moreno Hill Formation is. So, just in case anyone is interested in checking it out in their free time, or is like, I want to know where this thing is. So there you have it. But yeah, in terms of location and the kind of environment and setting, it's pretty solid. If I had to be critical, I would say that the vegetation appears to be a bit too modern. Because I'm not a botanist by any means, but you can kind of pick out some broad-leaved tree and leaves and such. And I mean, obviously they were appearing during the Middle Cretaceous, and I don't know about any specific paleobotany studies from the formation itself, but I think there would have been a bigger mix of like conifers and such, just because it was still and I could also be totally wrong on this, but the foliage just looks a bit too modern, um, and that could just be because of budget reasons or whatnot. But that would be my biggest critique about the setting. But otherwise, they got it pretty solid. So um, it's got my thumbs up, anyways.
Well, I don't really know a whole lot about this type of thing. Like, of course, I just have to probably agree, I guess, because nothing, to my eye, nothing stood out. But then again, I'm not only not a botanist, I'm just generally like not very well versed when it comes to plant life in general, especially prehistoric plant life, with few minor exceptions. Unless I really, really, really sit on it for a very long time, which unfortunately I don't have time to do, then I would probably be struggling to point out the most obvious errors with, again, only few exceptions. So I'd say I'm happy with the setting. It was, considering that also, you know how back then CGI was not yet at the level where you could just CGI the location as well.
Right.
Do you know what I
right.
mean? That this was not yet possible. And since we are, to remind our viewers once again, we are analyzing this program in mind, bearing in mind that we are looking how it would hold up if it were made exactly as it is, but today, based on whatever scientific knowledge that is actually available to us today. And just testing its time, I guess. How actually well it stood the test of time in comparison to maybe some other pieces that we might review later on. Well, not might, we will review later on down the line. So anything else to add about the setting, or shall we just move on to the next parts regarding specific animals and such?
I think we'll talk about this more as we go into the animals, but this did feel a bit like a ripped from the headlines kind of formation because of the dinosaurs that were found there that were relatively new. And we'll get into them as we progress, but I really do appreciate Discovery Channel choosing this formation and trying to highlight some of the new discoveries from North America, even if some of them haven't aged the best, shall we say. But I appreciate the attempt, so we can go on to the animals now.
Okay, cool. Yes, I share that sentiment as well, by the way. So I like it when they mix some of the things to like this, where they have certain things that are very well known, but they're also introducing you to something that is not commonly discussed or well known, So it's a nice mix and match, kind of like a good cocktail of items there on the list, on the menu, if you will. So. And who doesn't like a good menu of dinosaurs? Well, yeah, okay, I'm talking nonsense. Right, so, this one. So, this one, by that I mean Zuniceratops christopheri. So, I see the slide that you have made. You've taken a couple different shots from the artist whose name I can't remember from DeviantArt on the right hand side in the corner. Yes, something purple. Like, it's definitely something purple, I think. Or maybe I'm missing the name completely there, but just wanted to make sure that we mention at least the artist. If I'm saying it wrong, or let me know in the comments, because I'm obviously saying it straight from the top of the head, but I am subscribed to him as well. I follow him, so I know who he is. And if you are watching this is your work, so hope you don't mind us using it. There's no profit, but we just think it is very suitable for the purpose, and I guess we would like to give you credit. Maybe I will actually include the link to this specific image in the description, provided that the image on its own is actually still possible to find, because he sometimes updates them and removes the old ones, which could be a case.
Double checked I double checked in DeviantArt, and yes, the Zuniceratops by Purple is still on DeviantArt.
There we go. So if you're watching, you know who you are, and we give you a shout out a bit here just to give you some compliments on your work. Now, the left hand side, what you guys are seeing, I presume both the top and the bottom images are taken directly from the program. That's what the animal looks like. And I have not much to say that maybe other than the fact that, I don't know, you might make a case that the model looks a little bit wonky, I don't know how to, or goofy-ish, and I say ish because it's not particular. I mean, it depends how you look at it, really, because they seem to have this shape of the nose. If you notice the frontal part of the beak, that part of the snout seems to become taller, deeper, depends on how you obviously look at it. You know what I'm saying on the model, but if you look at the skull, that is not the case. So I am trying to understand, and I'm also looking at where they place the nostril as well. It's not like they've used a nasal bump of some type, restoration, perhaps to indicate that there might have been like extra scalation of some kind that provided it with that shape. But they actually put the nostril this high, meaning that it doesn't quite seem to follow the skull anatomy, so that's my only main problem with this reconstruction attempt. Everything else, I don't really see any issue that would stand out to me too much. So what are your thoughts on that part? Or any other part on the animal reconstruction?
Sure. I agree that the skull itself on the model from the documentary is a bit too rounded, whereas in the actual skull it's more pointed. A bit, even by ceratopsian standards, a bit beaky, shall we say. I think overall the model itself is pretty solid. They mentioned that it was about the size of a cow, which I forget exactly how much Zuniceratops actually weighs, so that could be accurate, that could be mistaken. I know that the two size comparisons I have here, one looks pretty small, a bit more like a sheep size, and the other one looks closer to a cow in size, so they probably could get to be the size of cows, but so I probably would have to double check my references on that, but overall I thought it was a decent comparison. And then also one of the other complaints that I've heard and I've also seen about the Zuniceratops is that its tail. I don't have very good pictures of the tail, admittedly, but if you watch in the documentary, it's a bit long and not super long, but it's a bit longer than it would have been in real life. And whereas like earlier ceratopsians would have had like a very specific tail structure to them, as seen in Purple's depiction there. Zuniceratops in the documentary is a bit more like a conventional dinosaur tail, so that was one thing that I have heard other people talk about, and in my own research, it sounds like they may have gotten the tail wrong in that case. Actually, you can even look at the skeleton in the bottom center there, and it appears a little bit longer in the documentary than it really should be. I believe I noticed a couple like osteoderm like bumps on the model itself, which I don't know if we have any evidence of that per se. It's not like it's not an eyesore, but if someone were to ask me, John, do they have that? I don't know if Zuniceratops possess that. But I think overall the model is decent overall, I think. I think any of my other critiques on the creature itself may have to do with behavior, which I don't know if you have any thoughts on the behavior itself at the moment, or because I want to let you talk about your thoughts on that first, and then I can share mine.
To be honest, I actually have not taken any specific notes on the behavior, but before we get to the behavioral part, maybe one other claim I wanted to address, few other claims actually that I wanted to address, because obviously, first of all, is the time period. The time period that Zuniceratops is known from, specifically, based on what I have found through the compilations that are featured in the wiki article, and the sources that they cite, it appears to be ranging from 93 to 91 million years ago, which falls outside of the setting that the documentary provides, which is 90 million years ago. Now, some people might say it's no big deal, it's just one digit, but that one digit makes a huge amount of difference because it's a 1 million years ago difference, and even on a grand scale of things, you might think it's not as big of a deal. It actually is quite a lot, like quite a big deal, by that, standard. It still is. So, yes, some people might try to throw tomatoes at me saying you're just being too strict, aka like too much, No, I think not. Honestly, I would beg to differ. I think this is important to note that they are falling out of the time period, so that part is a bit inconsistent. But one thing I wanted to also point out is that there is a claim that the show makes, and I believe they claim this similarly about the Dinosaurs, which is something that we will come to later in our other creature from this episode. But the claim would apply very similarly, however, is that that ceratopsian ancestors came from Asia, and that is something that I personally got a little bit confused by, because we have some ceratopsians that you can see that something like a Tyrannoceratops, which is not an ancestor to Zuniceratops, it actually looks like it's more of a descendant, if anything, and at least based on only the information that we know, and we don't have a lot on that animal anyway, so nor do I think we have quite a lot of samples when it comes to the remains of Zuniceratops either. It's not probably known from a large deposits, from what I understand at least. Maybe it is, I don't know, you can correct me on that, or in the comments correct me. But I don't think these animals are both particularly known from a big sample of specimens that would allow you to accurately predict maybe their exact timelines to the point of whether or not they are contemporary or whether they have an ancestral anagenetic type of relationship, and if that is the case, where are the transitions, because we're talking about different parts of the world, and that can be slightly difficult to prove and test here. And the fact that it comes from Asia and not the other way around is another important point, because in this case, if we look at Tyrannoceratops as potentially its closest relative, Tyrannoceratops at the moment appears to be the descendant, not the ancestor. But if we talk about ceratopsian ancestors being from Asia in general, that is another claim that is a little bit difficult for me to accept without any dose of skepticism, if I dare say it like that. That if you look at, say, Aquilops, which we've briefly touched on when we were discussing some of our notes, going over it prior to recording, I think this is a little bit of a stretch, and it's very difficult to actually say which one truly produced the first ceratopsian ancestor, But that is me. If anybody in the comments has something to add, feel free to add something if you know better. But John, what about yourself, if you wanna? Before we go to the behavior, what do you want to comment on these parts?
I think you did a pretty solid job explaining it. I was the one who brought up Aquilops because it's a very primitive ceratopsian, obviously one of those that was bipedal, did not really have any horns. It had like a micro frill, a bit like Yin Long or any of the other super basal ceratopsians from Asia, from the Jurassic and early Cretaceous. So I can maybe get behind the idea that ceratopsians, because a lot of very very early ceratopsians came from Asia. But however they migrated to North America I'm not really sure. And because Aquilops does exist there, it's hard to know if, did Zuniceratops, did its direct ancestors actually migrate from Asia to North America, or was there like a native population of ceratopsians endemic to North America that gave rise to Zuniceratops? And those are very interesting questions that we just do not have the kind of data to even begin to start understanding. It's not like where we have something like Tyrannosaurs. I think this is something you mentioned, where Tyrannosaurus rex has been argued as having been a migrant from Asia into North America and then outcompeted the native Tyrannosaurus stock. That is a hypothesis, and one that I think has a good degree of support given how closely Tyrannosaurus rex is related to Tarbosaurus and Zoochang Tyrannus, quote unquote. But in terms of ceratopsians, I don't think we have that kind of relationship data necessary to say for sure if ceratopsians migrated to North America from Asia, and those specific ceratopsians gave rise to Zuniceratops. And I'm not gonna. I mean, I was about to make a speculative claim that I think they were going back and forth throughout time, but I'm not even gonna make that claim because we just don't have that kind of data to support that. So I'm not gonna say it's wrong, but it's very, very hard to prove.
I agree that latter part, especially that being extremely hard to prove, because then in this case you are also facing a problem with North American, obviously specifically, Centrosaurians, Chasmosaurians, basically Ceratopsidae proper, whereas you have evidence of Centrosaurians appearing in Asia. At the moment, this appears to be an exception rather than a parallel trend that you can establish, because we have a whole evolutionary history of Centrosaurians in America, and when it comes to that part, the earliest known Centrosaurian comes from America, and we don't have any actual Centrosaurians that are dating earlier, or at least very much of a contemporary age in Eurasia, which is what I think would make this very complicated if we are going to go with your initially proposed idea, which you obviously decided not to delve into for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
So, anything? Okay, so I'll hand it over to you now. You can talk about behavior, because I actually haven't made any notes on behavior specifically. So if you want to take over here for the behavior, go ahead.
Okay. It's nothing too severe. Like it's not like they make any extraordinary claims about Zuniceratops behavior. It's not like they just go into blatant just impossible speculation that it cannot be proven at all. They do talk about how Zuniceratops was possibly a herding animal and had mating seasons where the males would rut for the right to mate, which, do we have proof of that? Not really. I mean, herding for ceratopsians is very hard to prove. Even with the mass bone beds that we do have, the exact structure of those herds might have been very different from what we see in like modern horned animals. But it's not like it's nothing bad. Really, the funny part was when I was rewatching it, the segment, and during the rut, as the two males are like, all right, we're just going to fight this out. One of them just straight up charges at the other one, which ceratopsians in general, not just Zuniceratops, but it's especially funny with Zuniceratops, probably did not charge into things. Their skulls are not designed to withstand that kind of force. So that was kind of like when I rewatched, I was like, ooh, that's not gonna age well, because again, like, their skulls are just not designed. They're not meant for battering rams to just ram into one another. They're just not meant to do that. So that was something that I noticed. But overall, I guess that was when I mentioned behavior, that was like the biggest thing on my mind was that charge. But and besides the hurting, whether or not you agree or disagree with it, I think I thought it was done fine. It wasn't like crazy out there speculation per se, just erring on the side of caution for me, because hurting, how exactly ceratopsians herded is still a debate currently going on in paleontology, and what that all looked like. So
Yes, I agree with the charging part. They seem like the horns, even if which we know that there are some evidence at least showing that they were capable of engaging in some type of jousting or dueling of some sort. there is no actual evidence to support that they would ram and charge into each other, and as you correctly pointed out, we can see from their skulls, they are just not designed for that type of engagement, to have all that mass and force behind that acceleration, kind of colliding both ways towards one another, It's just not that I can see it being possible. It's more likely that they would have maybe come close to one another at one point and engaged as they are already close up, and just maybe wrestle each other, maybe push each other, or whatever else they would do, but not basically charging from a distance and meeting face to face, like not like rams would basically do today, if you will. But the other thing I wanted to point out, what was it? Was the herding. Even though we have some evidence of something like, I believe, Centrosaurus apertus being found in quite large amounts together, of large groups of individuals of them. This is not to say that, let's say, even if we have evidence for Centrosaurus displaying that type of herding lifestyle, if it was truly part of the herd rather than maybe some other kind of means that I might not be aware of, that does not mean it was herding. But if it was, let's just say if it was, then is that truly reliable to apply to every other genus and subsequently species, given how species can truly be very variable on their lifestyle, even if superficially they might be very similar to each other, but especially on a skeletal level. If you take, not that I like to bring mammals into comparison, but let's say if you take a lion and a tiger, they're both genus, they're both animals of a genus Panthera, but they are fundamentally different in their lifestyles, both in their environments respectively, and also in how they lived, how they conducted their mating rituals, how they raised their offspring, how they lived, solitary versus groups, pairs, etc. So, and I mean dominant lifestyle, because that doesn't mean that you will never see tigers sometimes coming together and not really getting in each other's face too much. But there are also times when you see lions, wandering around on their own too. But that does not necessarily mean that that's their dominant lifestyle, right? So we're talking about their dominant lifestyle primarily in this case. And you can probably go further than that and take many more examples, and you will probably find very similar answers, that you cannot simply take something, even if they are related species or related genera to each other, and assume that their behavior would be very much the same in that sense. So it's not unreasonable to assume that, maybe to suggest, hypothesize, I would say, not assume, that's the wrong word to use here. But it's kind of difficult to exclude the possibility that they might have just lived individually, or occasionally they would come together, not really getting each other's faces. But there is really no way to truly tell, in my opinion personally, whether or not these type of finds are conclusive enough evidence to apply it to a whole group or a clade even altogether. So that's probably where I stand on this whole herding of ceratopsians in general, not just Zuniceratops, but overall.
Yeah.
I believe we may even come back to this point later when we do our final episode as well, because there is something to talk about on that part too. But we're not going to get into this now. So
For sure.
Are you happy with Zuniceratops?
One last quick thing. I did appreciate how they made the youngsters look like babies. Where it didn't look like they were just shrunken adults. Because I don't know if that was. I just appreciate how this documentary shows ontogeny. It's not with every dinosaur, obviously, but in this case, it does show like the baby Zuniceratops having like being dumpier looking and with smaller horns and frills, and I just appreciate that when older documentaries show like differences between the adults and young like that. So, but other than that, we can move on to the next animal.
I think we can address this part when we do our final
Yes.
overall
Yes.
thoughts on the show separately from our episode 5, just for the sake of keeping the videos a little bit more compact and separated when it comes to what we are going to be focusing on specifically. So
Okay.
I think this point will come up, and because it's a very good point actually. Now let's move on to the next animal then. And the next one on our list, just in the same order as they are, basically, as far as slides are concerned, I am going to open up this slide here. This is what we believe to be Suskityrannus hazelae, or hazelae, or hazelae, I don't know how you pronounce that. But you put it in the brackets as quote-unquote Dromaeosaur. So first thing to address, of course, is they are showing it with fuzzy covering, and we also have, if you don't mind telling, what is the artist piece that you have taken on the right hand side?
This looks like Sergei Krasovsky.
Okay, no problem. Looks good, in my opinion. So, and I think that's, if I cannot remember when it comes to the looks itself, whether or not they've put any like actual feathers, like these late stage type of feathers on their arms or not, or did they just stick to the fuzz overall, just a very basic fuzz?
I believe it's fuzz.
It's just fuzz, yes.
I know that
So,
it's just
yeah.
fuzz. So
I would probably keep the same, and to be honest, one thing I would probably also notice, and I think it's a worth noting as well, that when it comes to this type of primitive fuzz, I don't believe that these dinosaurs, at least based on some of the available evidence from some of the relatives, at least closer to them specifically, their fuzz was not very long. It was actually fairly short. So that's another thing that I've noticed, that a lot of times I see things like this and Utyrannus quali depicted with super long, fuzz that almost looks like the tail, for example, has a like a paintbrush type of ending,
like
if you
a
know what I mean.
fan.
Like well, not like a fan, but it looks like a paintbrush, basically.
Okay. Okay.
Like a thin paintbrush with a very sudden and stark brush, ending. And I don't believe there is actually evidence in the description of it. It's, in fact, they are very specific about the filaments being relatively short in comparison if you were to do your math there, so it should be pretty short. Anyway, now let's get into this one. So if we look at it from a perspective of what the show told us as a Dromaeosaur, there are quite a lot of things maybe to say, I'm sure. So do you have any knowledge of why they've actually assigned it to a Dromaeosauridae to begin with, which is something that I've actually wondered.
Yes. So, and I think the next animal, we'll get to another animal that is also supposed to be Suskityrannus hazelae. But one thing that it's funny that this documentary gets a lot of grief for the fact that the Suskityrannus in it is not ever, and the reason for that, the reason why it was never referenced as Suskityrannus is because the material that was initially found from the Moreno Hill Formation was initially thought to have been Dromaeosaur. So when the people from Discovery Channel went to paleontologists and they were like, "What? We were hoping to do a segment on this. What dinosaurs do you have?" And they brought up this jawbone, which I don't have on this slide, but it should be on the next slide. This jawbone that at the time they initially thought was a Dromaeosaur, but then further analysis showed that it was, at the time, because we didn't know if it was a Tyrannosauroid or not, said it was just a Coelurosaur. Now, when they found out about this, the team had already made a Dromaeosaur model. They'd already animated it. They'd already gone through the process of having this raptor that they thought existed, but now is not a raptor. in the program, and they were like, well, what do we do now? So they decided to keep the Dromaeosaur and just name it as a regular Dromaeosaur. And then they added another animal, which we'll get to later on. And that animal is what the skull bone ended up being based off of, truly. And that is the closest we got to Suskityrannus. But because they initially thought it was a Dromaeosaur and they told the crew about it, the animators and the designers first made a Dromaeosaur. And that is basically the history of Suskityrannus in this documentary. I personally think this is really not something I want to blame the makers of this documentary for, because obviously they were trying to do the best they could given the circumstances, and I appreciate their attempt to go back and rectify the issue, but obviously we still have this Dromaeosaur, and I felt it was worth just critiquing it, if not on the basis of a Suskityrannus, at the very least on the basis of it being just a Dromaeosaur. So that is why we have a Dromaeosaur that is apparently Suskityrannus in When Dinosaurs Roamed America.
I agree, and I think this is an important part to note, and I want to give like my personal view here as well, that if you notice that those older documentaries, most of the times, even if though they get a lot of things wrong, most of them actually do their legwork to simply go and, I mean, did their legwork at least to a very good degree, in my opinion, at least based on what you are saying and based on what I have seen and heard of back in the days too, that they actually spoke and consulted with the paleontologists to try and understand what material was out there, what is available, what they can use, and how they can use it, versus some of the, which I'm not going to reference yet because we will come to that when our next project is initiated after we wrap up with this one, which is where I believe many of the paleontologists who, you know, were involved there were pretty much just inserting their own pet ideas, and whether or not intentionally or not, we will get into that later, but as of a matter of fact, looked like they were selling them like they were facts, objective basically knowledge of sort, rather than actually being very clear that many of these things depicted were not actually factually grounded, if I were to say it like that. But again, I'm trying to avoid going into details here because it's a different topic, but we will get to that program. You probably can guess what it is, so it's whatever. We'll get to that eventually. And yeah, that aside, speaking of, I wanted to talk about something else in regards to this dinosaur, and that is behavior as well. Now, they have shown, this is very funny to me, this is where I legit actually thought this was quite a bit of a sloppy, like, toss-up on their part, if you will. It's basically, they claim that raptors will get smarter, okay? But for some reason they're showing them when they're eating, and there's a forest fire later in the episode, that for some reason they decide not to flee the forest fire and just keep eating. I do not know a single animal, no matter from what clade, that would do that, basically. Even an insect would flee from an immediate danger from its meal, you know, in one way or another. It would try to flee the immediate danger. So I don't understand why they decided that it was a good idea to portray them as eating and ignoring the obvious danger. So I don't really know what to make of that, other than it's just a very sloppy writing or not sure what they were trying to show here, basically, is my main point, I guess.
Yeah, I got nothing for that particular scene. If you're going to hype up animals as being intelligent and very crafty, do not make them do really dumb things that they shouldn't be doing because of their intelligence. That is a word of advice that I give to both people who are making dinosaur documentaries and also, fictional works. Like science fiction, fantasy, just any kind of story you tell. If you have interesting or not, if you have intelligent characters or intelligent animals, don't make them do things that are clearly below their intelligence level without good reason. And I don't think this was done with good reason. So I don't know. I don't know what to say about that other than that.
Yeah, I agree with that part as well. Now, one last thing that I wanted to say on my part at least, that uh, this animal, if we are looking at, which we are looking at, Suskityrannus, it fits the time period. This is the only animal in this particular episode that actually correctly uh, correlates and is consistent with the time period of being in a 90 million years ago gap, because it is dated from 93.5 to 89.3 million years ago, which fits within the given timeline that the show provides us with. So that's my part on that as well. And anything else? Or we go to the next slide, further expanding on Suskityrannus, which is going to
Uh,
include your other jaw fragment and other parts of information, which in the show is presented as a different animal, but now we know it's actually the same animal.
right. So, a couple things. One, when the Dromaeosaurs attack the no, oh gosh, the Zuniceratops herd, and they attack the losing male of the joust. One of them hops onto the back of the Zuniceratops and starts clawing at it with its toe claws, which, as far as I'm aware, that's not something that I mean, dromaeosaurs couldn't necessarily use their toe claws like knives in the same way that like you would hear back in the day. Um, so that's one thing I noticed and kind of caught my attention. And then the other thing is that the arms of dromaeosaurs. So I know that dromaeosaurs tend to be depicted sometimes these days with like their arms closed up like birds, which they couldn't do that. I'm sorry, they just really could not do that because their arms are not built for that. Um, Funny thing about this documentary, the dromaeosaurs go back and forth between their correct positions and their incorrect positions, which is um, I don't have good pictures of that, but if you watch it, you'll notice they sometimes tuck in their arms like what you would see with bird wings, and then other times they're held outwards like how they're supposed to be. So, funny that. But otherwise, those are my two other notes on the Dromaeosaur of the segment.
Okay, well, that's a very interesting observation. I personally haven't actually noticed this difference in the posturing, which is an important note to mention, because we will probably further down the line review more projects which will feature, obviously and inevitably, more dromaeosaurid animals, and we will be more than likely addressing those very points numerous times, I am predicting. So, shall we move to the next slide, or there's something else?
We can move on to the next slide.
Okay. Mind you, by the way, this is the same animal, but this time it's we're looking at it from the show's perspective. We're looking at it as it's some other animal, which is a Coelurosaur of some kind. Both of them, by the way, are the same animal, though. This is one thing important. The ones that was thought to be a dromaeosaur and this one, the Coelurosaur, both of these are the same animal. So, what did you want to comment on that part, outside of what we have already mentioned about Suskityrannus?
I think the biggest thing I would say about the Coelurosaur, I mean, I have the whole type of the skull, and I also have a picture from one of the fossil segments of the documentary where they actually show one of the paleontologists holding the whole type jaws of Suskityrannus, that back then thinking it was just the Coelurosaur. And I think in terms of comparing it to current depictions and reconstructions based on what we on the more material that we have of this thing, I feel like the Coelurosaur does a better job of encapsulating what Suskityrannus might have looked like back then. And so admittedly it's very brief. It doesn't have a lot of screen time. The model has this shine to it, for at least in my eyes, that has a bit of a shine to it that could have been the result of them having to make this thing relatively last minute. So it does not appear with any other dinosaur, to my knowledge, in the rest of the documentary. So it has its own separate scenes. It has very little screen time, and overall, I think it's a decent model that, considering that they didn't really have a whole lot to work off of, it holds up pretty well. But at the same time, it is sort of just based as a Coelurosaur, when really the actual animal was a tyrannosauroid proper, and there might be a few. If we were to make another documentary about the Moreno Hill Formation and we were to depict Suskityrannus, there might still be a few differences from this creature to the new depiction we would have, but I don't have any major complaints about it. It's just not prominent enough to have for me to have any real problems with it. So
I would say that the differences in terms of the depiction would be pretty obvious to see if you look at the image from the documentary on the left, and you look at the image of that artwork from Sergei Krasovsky. So there is basically going to be your difference, pretty much, in my personal opinion. That's what probably I would expect to see, give or take something. But that's what I would hopefully expect to see. And of course, as far as I know, Sergei did not draw this one with quote-unquote lips, which I believe is another point to mention, that I don't believe the documentary was showing them as having lips either.
I don't think so either, but I would have to, because they don't have too many close-up shots. There's one close-up shot of the skull or the head, but the teeth were so small. I don't think they. If they didn't have lips, it was a little bit difficult to tell from my end.
Exactly, I was the same on this as well, because if the teeth are really that small, then they could have actually pretty much been kind of hidden from a distance if you were to look at the animal, even real life, unless you get really close and you can see those teeth, tiny ones, just maybe sticking out a little bit if there is an overbite. But that's as far as I would probably go with it. And yes, I am aware of the new paper that has been published. My stance pretty much remains the same, and I will elaborate it maybe some other time a bit more in detail. There's not really much to say, but I want to do it maybe when we get to the to talking about Tyrannosaurus in our final episode. So maybe I will mention briefly what my view on this whole thing is. But overall my view is pretty much the same, but I will explain why later. So I am personally happy with Suskityrannus, and I'm ready to move on to the last creature, which is Nothronychus. Do you want to move on now, or do you want to still say something about this one?
We can move on.
Okay. So, Nothronychus. Well, one thing I wanted to say, maybe it's a good way to start from it to begin with, actually, that just like Zuniceratops, it is outside of the time period, so it's not consistent by 1 million years. But otherwise, I actually... Here's the thing. I think this was a pretty decently depicted creature. Correct me if I'm wrong, maybe I'm forgetting something because it's been so freaking long. But I think they did good on this one. Honestly.
I totally agree. This is, I think, one of the best dinosaurs from their documentary, and it was really good that they put so much effort into it, because I think it was the species mckinleyi. Let me double check
It is,
real
yes,
quick.
mckinleyi, yes.
Yep, it was mckinleyi, and it was discovered it was described in 2001. So this is like same year this thing came out. Same year that this documentary came out, this thing was described. So this is really good. I don't have that many complaints about it. I mean, people can argue about the feathering. I do have a depiction from Paleo-Neolithic that has a bit more feathery coating. But overall, I think that I don't have any problems really, nothing major with Nothronychus. It's a really solid depiction, and I'm really glad that Discovery did this animal justice.
I think it's also fair to point out that different maybe animals from the Zuniceratops family might have actually showed different type of plumage.
Right.
So they might not have been copy and paste of one another, as many people mistakenly assume a lot of times. So the presence may have been a factual truth that they were to a degree present throughout the family, unless we see evidence showing something else, maybe an exception. If not, then we can assume they were. Assume as in like we can hypothesize. I mean, again, that's the bad word, assume, right? So not good word for this context. We can hypothesize or suggest, let's just say suggest or hypothesize that everyone from that family had it, but we cannot necessarily be 100% sure that they were copy and paste of one another identically. Okay, so
right.
But I'm happy with how the program showed it. I very much want to say that for a dinosaur that is considerably so much lesser known among the people, generally speaking, and it's not particularly known to be very popular by any stretch of the imagination. It's one of the best dinosaurs in the entire program, honestly.
Yeah.
And people tell me, AK Rex hates feathered dinosaurs. Go screw yourselves, morons. I like dinosaurs, full stop, okay? Don't be giving me some stupid ass labels like that. Nothronychus is one of my favorite dinosaurs in this freaking entire show, okay? You know what? Eat a turd or something. So, there we go. That's settled. Now, anything else you wanted to add? Like, I personally liked how it was depicted when it was just casually eating and minding its own business. And whenever the Dromaeosaur, quote-unquote Dromaeosaur, tried to basically screw around with it, basically it effed around and found out, if you will. So
yeah, like, don't mess with me, and I won't mess with you. It's a very it's most of its scenes like there's the introduction scene, which gives it plenty of there's a really nice shot of it where it shows the claws, and they make it out to be like, oh, this could be a carnivore, and they show, oh no, it's just this weird plant eater. I love the description of it where they say half plucked turkey. It looks like a half plucked turkey and walks like a pot-bellied bear, which is, I mean, I appreciate it when documentaries can have fun with that and be like, this animal looks a bit absurd, but in a tasteful manner, and then they show it, actually being kind of a badass. So, yeah, I thought they absolutely nailed their introduction for Nothronychus, and then after that they just kind of showed it as, oh, there's two Zuniceratops fighting. In other news, and he just goes back to eating. I don't know. It's hard for me to find the right words for it, but it's really good.
It's one of those type of depiction that is almost a parallel to, that kid who is super mysterious and secretive. Nothing is really known about him. And he looks like a dork and goofball, but secretly works out and maybe does martial arts. And if you try to F around with him, he just basically slaps you in the face and be like, you done yet? Okay, bye, I'm eating again, whatever. Like, back to business as usual, basically. Just completely,
It's like, do not mess with a quiet kid at school. Pretty much that. It's like when I look at music on YouTube and one of the comments says, when the quiet kid finally snaps. So, anyways, memes aside, like I love this Nothronychus. Honestly, it really helped give me appreciation for the genus. More so than I think any other Therizinosaur depiction out there. So, definitely up there in terms of favorites for the whole family.
And it's not many of them out there either, you know, the Therizinosaurs as a
Right.
family. Not to mention that overall not many, but this is the only depiction of Nothronychus that I actually know in any kind of media that I can think of straight from the top of the head. From what I have seen. Maybe there's something I haven't seen yet. Okay?
There is another. I think Nothronychus graphami is in Planet Dinosaur. So in When Dinosaurs Roamed America, it's McKinleyi. In Planet Dinosaur, it's graphami, and graphami appears in the final episode of that show, which we may or may not cover down the road, but I'm not gonna get into that too much. So it's appeared at least twice in paleo media, to my knowledge.
Planet Dinosaur, the BBC one, right?
Yes, the BBC one.
Oh, I want to do it. I want to do it eventually. It might just
Oh,
not
yeah,
be
yeah, okay.
all the way to the top, but I definitely
Right.
want to do it. Yeah, we're doing it.
Okay.
It's decided.
Okay,
we're
for
doing it.
All right, cool, awesome.
Right. I just don't know when we're gonna be doing it, but I'm decided we're doing it. Like we're not. No,
Okay.
you're not getting out of this one, John. We're doing it.
I'm not saying I'm getting out of this. I just didn't want to lead into some discussion about a future topic and get us derailed or whatever. That's all I'm saying.
Oh, that's okay. Fair enough. No, anyway, yes, one of my favorite dinosaurs in the entire program. Not to mention that I think the fact that they've done so well with this particular dinosaur actually elevated the episode in my eyes for something that you could say otherwise was a fairly modest episode overall. Though I would not. I'm not sure if I like. Would you call this episode the weakest of all, or would you still not say that much? Because I'm pretty sure we have already dubbed another episode. As being the
I said
weakest.
that the early Jurassic segment
Yeah.
with Dilophosaurus was the weakest.
And that's the one I kind of feel like was the weakest. I don't think this one was the weakest, despite the fact that they depict considerably fewer animals overall, so there's not that many overall of them. Although, come to think of it, yeah, because we look at it from a point of view that Suskityrannus, you know, but here Suskityrannus is depicted as two different animals, so they kind of have more, I guess, which way you
Yeah.
look at it, you know. So, but okay, Nothronychus, amazing, love it, nothing bad to say about it. But they of course go back to the other point, which I've brought up with the ceratopsians, and once again is that there is but well, it's not actually that it evolves. I don't know if they mention it as well, whether it evolved from Asia as well. Which if they do, then it's gonna be maybe the same way to address that particular claim as we did with the Zuniceratops. But
Yeah, they mentioned that the quote goes like Zuniceratops, its ancestors also migrated from Asia, which if you go back to our Zuniceratops segment to talk more about that, because we don't have that kind of evidence to prove that for sure.
so basically the same points would apply in this case as well.
Yes.
We're
Yes.
all the same ideas, same liking data for this in this case too, all the same kind of stuff overall. Now,
Yes.
there's another claim that I wanted to address regarding this, and this is they stated that Therizinosaurs evolved from predators. Now, it's important to say that I think the earliest Therizinosaur is Falcarius, which is an North American, exclusively known from North America dinosaur, if I'm correct.
Yep.
And did you want to comment something on what you might think could be some clue, if there is any? And
So, I admit I need to refresh my memory on the specifics that go into Therizinosaurs and compare. So with Falcarius, it's the most basal member of the group, and as far as I'm aware, it is the earliest member of Therizinosauria, going back to 139 million years ago in the early Cretaceous. Now, the thing about Falcarius is that even though it superficially looks like a conventional carnivorous theropod with its claws and its overall build, its teeth are at this point in its evolution meant for herbivory. Arsene and I have talked about how there's notable serrations in the teeth, but I'm not really sure if that's like evidence to prove that Falcarius was like omnivorous or could even process meat in the same way that it would be able to process plants. So at the moment, Falcarius is currently slated as already a herbivorous member of the group. Now, I think even though it's a pretty reasonable take to say that Therizinosaurs evolved from predators, we don't really have the missing link that shows a transition from a carnivorous group of theropods, which in this case would be somewhere within the Maniraptora, because we're talking Coelurosaurs here. We don't have a member from that group that displays omnivory. I think that would be the most important clue to solving where, what lineage do Therizinosaurs evolve from, and were their direct ancestors predators, or were they always herbivorous? And I think in terms of so if we were to find an animal that was omnivorous, it would show, okay, this thing has teeth that was built for eating meat and plants. And if we were to do isotope analysis on the teeth and we found out, yes, it was eating a mix of plants and animals, then that would be a sign that, okay, we're obviously seeing a transition from a obligate carnivore to an omnivore, and then potentially obligate herbivore. But we don't have that per se. So where exactly that transition happened, we're not really sure. Did Therizinosaurs evolve from a group that was already herbivorous and then developed on their own, or did they directly transition from obligate carnivores? We're not entirely sure. I think you could make the argument that if you go far enough back, that the ancestors of Therizinosaurs were carnivorous, but we don't have the specific species necessary to show that transition. And I think that's something worth further study, because this is a really cool group that I think deserves more study, and I think that's a very good question to ask. You know, how do you complete this bridge from obligate carnivory to obligate herbivory? So,
well,
that's where I stand on that.
Yeah. No, fair enough. Thank you. I mean, I pretty much agree with everything you said as well. Very much subscribing under every single word. I would add that we do have evidence of this happening in one instance, like marsupials, which me and Harry have discussed when we were doing our segments together. But and there are probably many other instances where this happened, which I'm not just able to remember straight from the top of my head. If Jason were here, he would probably quickly be able to point something out. However, we do, in my opinion, need some more material from these transitionary type of groups, which I'm curious how would they basically look. You know, that's my most important part. How would their proportions differ in comparison, and would they maintain similar type of proportion, which I doubt they would, but if they did, what would be their niche? You know, there's so many questions, because anatomy dictates different types of, you know, roles that they fulfill in their respective ecosystems. So I'm very curious to see what would happen there.
Right.
So, any more notes on Nothronychus?
I think we covered the big one that we had discussed earlier. So outside of that, I think we can just say this is one of the best dinosaurs of the documentary. And it like you say, it really bumps up the segment quite a bit. So.
Well, there it is. People will probably get the reference, provided that I have done a decent job at it, which I wasn't actually trying, so probably was kind of shit, but it's okay. Shall we get to our final slide, John. What do you think?
Yes.
Okay. The final slide shows us the Moreno Hill Formation and Mesozoic wildfires. What would you like to tell us about this one, John?
So, because of all the new dinosaurs, described or not, from the Moreno Hill Formation at the time this documentary was released, this was pretty big. This was not only the first time that you were seeing dinosaurs with feathers in a documentary, you were also seeing Therizinosaurs for the first time. You were seeing Zuniceratops, a primitive ceratopsian without a nose horn. And it was a really golden opportunity that I am so glad that Discovery Channel leapt to that and said, we're going to make this our middle section between the obvious Morrison segment and the obligate Hell Creek segment. So this was a very prime opportunity. I think if they were to play it a little bit safer, given the fact that the Dromaeosaur and Coelurosaur were both based off of Suskityrannus, I think if they were to play it a little bit safer, they could have gone with something like the Cloverleaf or Antlers Formation, where you have Deinonychus, Tenontosaurus, Acrocanthosaurus, Sauropelta for sure from Cloverleaf. You could maybe do that, but overall, I thought it was still a really solid choice. And so the first paleontology segment of the fourth segment is just Jim Kirkland and I'm gonna forget his name, talking about the Moreno Hill Formation in the Zuni Basin of New Mexico, and just talking about the new dinosaurs they were finding there. So Nothronychus, the Coelurosaur that ended up being Suskityrannus, just sort of showing, these are very important animals to show in the evolution of these groups of dinosaurs, especially for like ceratopsians and tyrannosaurs, which obviously down the line we would find out that it was Suskityrannus. So, but it was still, it's like, hey, let's fanboy about this really cool new site in New Mexico that we've just stumbled upon, and it was, I really liked that. Not to mention that, it was a good. I think I just remembered the actual phrasing of so back then, because of the amount of coal that you find in the Moreno Hill Formation, it would have been poorly drained. That's what I was trying to think of. I don't know why I forgot that earlier, but so they show. The reason why I bring that up is because they not only show the paleontologists in the field just showing what they found, showing this wonderful little formation, but they also do the formation quite a bit of justice in terms of how they depict it. And, flaws and all, I think that this was a very solid move on Discovery's end to show this, to just say, hey, we've got some new dinosaurs in North America. It's not just, Morrison and Hell Creek and the whatever is in the Triassic, we got some pretty well-known animals throughout the documentary, but this is like where they really get to show some really unique animals and stuff from a formation that not too many people know about. I'm sure there might be still some people in paleontology who may have heard it in passing, but are not as well versed in the Moreno Hill Formation as others. So, the more we find about these, we also, I think, some years back, also found like a primitive hadrosauroid or something. So we've already got like a duckbill from the formation as well. So we're already seeing like these very, very primitive members of some of the major groups of dinosaurs that would live on until the very end of the Cretaceous. So there's a lot of importance to the Moreno Hill Formation that I think sometimes gets overlooked because it doesn't have such a rich fossil record. But I'm glad that, we have this material and that we got to see it in a documentary like this. And done so well, too.
Yeah,
so that's what I want.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I thought you finished there, so you go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to let you go.
Okay, no worries. No, I just wanted to say that definitely the touch of when they actually feature paleontologists on screen just talking about things. This is what I think truly stood out to me at the time when this came out, because this was sort of, I don't know if it was directly intended that way, but many people perhaps who watched this show after the Walking with Dinosaurs may have treated it as this is in a way an American basically response to BBC's Walking with Dinosaurs, if you will. And in contrast to Walking with Dinosaurs, this is where I think this show wins me over more, by them including at least some aspects of it where they show more behind the scenes, like what you have mentioned, which we see throughout in every episode, if I'm correct. Actually, we see that kind of thing, and we don't see that in Walking with Dinosaurs by comparison. And at the time, they were the two things that were very prominent when they first came out. So I kind of thought that is the way I think this program to me specifically stood out. We will talk more about it, by the way, in our final conclusion overall about the program. But I think this is one thing that I wanted to say that I agree with 100%, 200%, I would say probably.
Yeah, and then the other segment they have is about Mesozoic wildfires. Now, this is a very interesting segment because it's a huge plot point in the overall segment where, you know, as things are sort of there's a bit of build up to it already. There's like this sense of a storm brewing in the background throughout the segment, especially in the final third of it. And what happens is that a freak lightning strike starts a forest fire, and apparently, based on what I watched of it, they based this whole sequence off of and I don't know if this was found in the Moreno Hill Formation, but there were some rocks that in the picture in the bottom center, Karen Chin is etching out, where she argues that there is evidence of a forest fire going on, that we find burnt wood, very, very black wood that would indicate some evidence of forest fires. Now, what occurred to me a few months back, I was talking to my advisor, and we were just having a casual conversation, and he just casually mentions that this actually is not evidence of a forest fire. And the reason for that is because actually proving that forest fires existed back then, at least using strictly the rock record and the fossil record, is very hard. And I think in later analysis, it turned out that some of this material was just very, very heavily carbonated wood and carbonated rock. Now, if this was at the Moreno Hill Formation, which I don't know if it was, but if it was in the Moreno Hill Formation, you might remember me mentioning that the formation itself has a lot of coal, and that's what helps make it very poorly drained. And because of that, there's a strong chance that what may have been happening was that the material itself just became ultra. This is not a word that geologists ever use, but carbonified, essentially. And that's why it was so black. It wasn't necessarily because it was burnt. Now, in Karen Chin's defense, it's not like they lied to the audience about this. It's not like it's a bad take. It's just that it's hard to really specify if the material you're looking at is the result of a forest fire. Now, forest fires have existed all throughout human history, and I really don't see it a problem that you have a forest fire in a documentary about dinosaurs, because unless for some reason forest fires just never happened back during the Mesozoic, you were bound to at least have one or two, or some that were just really, really bad, especially in the case of what is shown in the documentary itself. So, you know, forest fires absolutely had to have happened back during the days of the dinosaurs. That's just, I don't know how you can say they didn't. But in terms of the evidence they used to try and justify the forest fire itself, it later turned out to be that it's not direct evidence for a forest fire that happened. It may have just very likely been the result of geochemical processes that made the wood black. And that is something that was found after the fact, after this documentary was made. Obviously, if this was released today, I would be more critical of it. But I don't. I'm not upset by this. I'm not upset that this is an inaccuracy because, again, forest fires definitely happened. I think just if for no other reason than basic intuition about how weather works and how nature operates. And I think just because we didn't see it in these rocks, we could find something down the road that may give us better evidence of a forest fire. It's just very difficult to prove given how geochemistry works. So, it's a weird inaccuracy, but not one that I think hampers the segment too much. But I felt it was worth talking about because it was something that I learned during a conversation with my advisor, and it was just worth bringing up. So that's why I wanted to really talk about the wildfire segment, because it is a very elaborate sequence. It's a very good sequence overall, but the specific evidence for it just wasn't there.
Yeah, it's just it's not like we are trying to throw tomatoes at the documentary for it specifically. It's just, or the person who made the claim. It's more so just looking at the claim itself in isolation, and I think it would be very interesting, however, to find more evidence that could give us a good clue on specific events of such natural disasters, and because certain things like that are just very difficult to prove, as you correctly pointed out, and finding something that could potentially show us that and give us maybe subsequently an understanding and a guide of how we can maybe test these type of theories so that we can prove them would be something I'm certainly very curious to find out eventually, if we are obviously going to ever find this in our lifetime, which we might. We never know. We have a lot of new technologies available. We have many other tools available at disposal. So that may not be quite as far away as I even might think it is. So we just have to wait and see. But hoping for the best, of course.
Yes.
Anything else you will have to add to this particular point, or just overall to this episode?
I guess just for clarification, if I didn't say beforehand, Karen Chin did reanalyze this, so this is not her. So as far as I'm aware, based on what my advisors told me, this is not her official opinion. Not that I want to speak for her, but I just don't want people to come away thinking like, I don't know. Just want to make sure that there's no like weird drama that comes out of this for some reason. I don't know. But anyways, yeah, I just thought I would share that. Otherwise, those are the two fossil segments for the segment. So it's kind of redundant. And there we have it. That's segment number 4 of When Dinosaurs Roamed America.
Indeed. And I think that's pretty much it. We've exhausted all our material. If anybody else wants to add something, of course, you're welcome to do so in the comments, and either myself or John or both of us will, whenever we can, will respond or engage with you if you have something particularly interesting to say. And we are not going to respond to any attempts to troll or otherwise just throw garbage around, if you will, metaphorically speaking. So not even worth trying, because as I said, we are working almost full time now outside of this, and we only have so much time on our hands to deal with certain things. So if it's something that we find to be interesting, we will definitely respond, and we can engage in some conversations that maybe, if they are particularly gonna be crazy to the point where it becomes super like, what's the best word to use here? I wouldn't say deep, but you know, where it proves to be particularly nuanced, I would say that much, then we might even potentially have a new possible video material to make in the future, regardless of a long or a short one. Depends on, of course, what the said material will be, if we do, of course, have one. So I think it might be worth pointing out. So if you do have something interesting to say about this, or overall about this time period and this formation and these animals, I would be happy to read your comments about that. Anything you want to say, John?
I think I'm good for right now.
Okay. Anyways, well, thanks very much for coming to co-host with me once again, John, and I also want to thank our audience for hopefully listening or watching this long, and we will come to you soon with our final episode, and hopefully it won't be another half year or so. Hopefully it will be sooner than that, but we shall see. We shall see. Thanks very much for watching. Hope you like the content, and share your thoughts on things that we have said if you would like to. And I look forward to engaging with you again. Maybe we will someday do a live stream to chat properly together. And I don't know when, but if and when I do plan this, I will definitely let you guys know. Until then, stay tuned, and we will see you guys later. Thank you so much, and take care of yourselves. Bye bye.
Ciao.